So editing Adobe educational media in Adobe Premiere. So first of all, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So about this session, so we're going to talk through the basics of video editing in Adobe Premiere. So I'm actually going to show you how to sort of piece together a little educational video in Premiere that we actually shot last year. And so actually show you how we would put something together. So talk about how to do basic video and audio correction. So this is, if a piece of video needs to be brightened or recolored, or if the audio's got a bit of background noise, how to fix that. How to utilize the UQ approved templates. So that's very, very important to keep things on brand as well. Even though a lot of it is internal facing, we do need to use the correct branding, the correct fonts, all that kind of stuff when we're producing our material. And then, of course, exporting your videos for use on various platforms. So how to do that effectively. All right. So in the previous session, I talked about the pre-production and the production process. So pre-production is where you choose a format for your video, you write a storyboard. Production is where you film or record a voiceover. Whereas the post-production process, this is where you get all your footage off your camera, whether it's a phone or whether it's an SLR or other video camera. You bring it in your computer, and using a program like Adobe Premiere, you can edit your clips together. And Adobe Premiere, as you can see, is on the screen here. So Adobe Premiere can look a little bit scary in terms of its interface, but as long as you sort of just focus on the things you need, then you can kind of ignore all the other stuff. So yeah, we'll talk about editing graphics as required, a bit of color correction, adjusting audio, and then finally outputting your final product. So I want to first of all show you how it is best to set up a project. So what I've got here, and this is the same kind of, and you can see my desktop here, can't you? Yes, it says it's sharing. So I've got a folder here called Quantum Computer. So we're going to be creating a video today about a quantum computer. Well, it's not actually a quantum computer, it's a qubit, which is I think like a small part of a quantum computer from what I remember. And so the first and one of the most important things to do is create a folder. And the reason it's important to create a folder that contains all your material is that video editors are very fussy about where your files are located. And if it loses track of those files, it can come up with all sorts of errors and you can have all sorts of dramas. So it's important to, first of all, have everything that you need within one folder. And what we tend to do is we tend to have our folder structure like this, where we have something for assets. So assets is where we kind of put just images, videos, and other stuff that is not video footage or a final product or our Premiere project. So that's that's images, that's sounds, and other random things. Footage is where we actually put the video footage that we've used. So in this particular example, we actually had two cameras, and there's the video footage from those two cameras. Output is the final product, so it's the final video file that we export at the end. And then Premiere is the Premiere file that we actually going to be editing our video in. Now, I won't confuse you by having all this rubbish here. I'll get rid of that. We don't need that. The reason that there's a few of these other folders here is because this is an existing template that I will actually provide to you. And what happens is when you open it up, it tends to start creating these other random folders and auto-save files and this kind of stuff. So a lot of times when you first create a Premiere project, this stuff may not be here, but it just kind of appears over time because it needs those folders to kind of run the Premiere project. So in the template I give you, these will probably be there, but in your own projects, they may not appear straight away. So this is the Premiere project template that I will give you. And the reason that I'm supplying you with that is because it actually has some pre-approved graphics that are all UQ approved. and that you can use within your own productions to create educational media. And so the nice thing about that is you don't, because you are using an approved template and you're using the correct fonts and everything, you don't need to sort of worry about branding kind of getting upset that you're creating something off brand. So really, if you're creating PowerPoints or graphics or anything for stuff at UQ, it should use the correct UQ PowerPoint. So there's a UQ PowerPoint out there, and you should use that to create any kind of PowerPoints that you're displaying. So they should be updated. That they should have all the new branding, using the correct fonts. And essentially, you can do that by just following the branding guidelines of the PowerPoint, the generic UQ PowerPoint that you download. So for us in this particular template, the branding consists of a nice intro, which is essentially a title that comes up at the start, your video title, and a bit of some nice jacarandas. It has the person's name, so whoever's currently presenting on camera. And then it has what we call an end plate, which is the final graphic that comes up on screen. So for people who are completely unfamiliar with Premiere or any kind of video editor, the nice thing about video editors is they all tend to look very similar and all tend to work very much the same. And what I mean by that is they all have file menus where you create new projects, you open, close, just like you'd expect, save, have edits for edit, cut, copy, all that sort of stuff. But they also have other ones for sequences. So they're adjusting settings for your sequence. And a sequence is kind of your timeline, is where all your clips sit on. Also things like graphics and view window, which can help, which is common across most programs. So that's all very similar to a lot of other programs out there. But inside it, you have obviously things that are fairly unique to video editors by, you have these sort of panels here that you can click on that will eventually populate with different settings for the video that you bring in. You have your preview window here that basically allows you to watch the video that you're currently editing. So it has a little a play option here for you to play. It also has this blue bar that you can click and drag. And essentially that just kind of drags through your timeline, or what we call scrubbing through your timeline. You can see here it says 0, and then as you drag that along, that increases in time, ticks up as you'd expect a timer to tick up to. There's also some other properties that pop up. So whenever you click on something, there'll also be some other options that might pop up here for it as well. Over in the bottom left is where all your files will live. So any files that you import into your project. So because this project is a pre-made template, it already has some stuff in here. So it already has the timeline. Here is the timeline, which if I open that up, is this timeline I've got here. So this is where you actually arrange files. So this is where you have images, sounds, video, whatever you can bring into your timeline here and arrange them into your sequence. These other folders here, just contain other stuff that are relevant to your video that we're editing today. So these are things like, FX is the black matte, which is, it's like this black thing that kind of fades in between. They're just sort of graphic elements that are used. The end plate, which is that end plate, and purple matte is kind of this purple fade that happens. Whereas these motion graphics templates, they are things that are a little bit more involved. They are these things here. A motion graphics template is essentially an element within a timeline that is actually dynamic and can be edited. So this isn't just a piece of video or something, or an image that we've dropped in. This is just an image, so we can't do anything with it. But these, what you can actually do is you can bring them in and you can click on them, and you'll have some properties for them, which means that I can very easily just put that on my timeline, go over to here and put in whatever title I want, and that will populate into the template automatically. And it has sort of subheadings as well. And you can go in and you can change them to have different kind of backgrounds. So the ones that you'll probably use are probably the jacaranda, purple on white and white on purple. These other ones are transparent, which means that you can put an image underneath them if you wanted to. So I'll just use this image as an example. I can whack that underneath and you'll see it'll pop up underneath. Looks a bit terrible, but yeah, so these are dynamic. And so these can be edited. So you can go in and change the presenter's name. So this is John, and here's a person. And so you can add in who they are and what they do. And you can also add another line there as well. So yeah, so they can be dynamically updated. Now, this is a template that has already got this stuff in, but if you don't have a template and you still want to use all these, what we call uh, motion graphics templates, this is what they're called, is that if you have a timeline that's brand new, and what you can do to create a brand new timeline or a sequence is you can go to you can go to File, New Sequence, and so this will create a new sequence. And basically, for the most part, you're going to be creating something that's 1080p. And the reason that we do 1080p is basically because most of the stuff that you produce will be that size. You don't need to actually produce stuff in 4K. It's good to record it, but maybe not actually outputting in 4K because of download sizes. If stuff's being uploaded to Echo, you don't want videos that are too big. So what we tend to get people to do is if they're wanting to create a sequence from scratch rather than using my template, is you can go into something like 1080p here. And for the most part, you're probably going to be bringing stuff in that's going to be, now it doesn't have 30 on here, does there? But we could probably just use 29 because it's pretty close. Yeah. So most of the stuff that you're going to be actually editing is going to be 30 frames per second. Now a bit of a quirk about video is technically it's not 30. Technically, it's sort of 29.97. Or 29.97 is a bit of an old school number, but this timeline can still be used for 30. It's fine. So you can use this timeline here for most video footage that you'll be capturing from your phones or whatever. So if you wanted to create a blank timeline, you could do that. Click on that, go OK. And then basically what you can do then is that if you wanted to bring in these elements yourself, what you can actually do is, first of all, you've got to install them. So what we'll do is we'll actually go to the motion graphics. Oh, here we go, graphics templates, here we go. So you've got to find the graphics templates little tab. And you can often find that by going to Window Graphics Templates, and then it'll appear somewhere. And then these are where the UQ graphics templates will eventually sit. Now you'll see there's none in here because I haven't actually imported them into this project. They do live, it's a bit of a quirk of Premiere, and I know this can be a bit confusing. If I've got a template that I've created and it already has these in there, then they will live in there and they'll happily live in there, but they won't actually appear in kind of this graphics template area to reuse them in other projects. So if you want to reuse them for other projects, you've got to go into where your assets are, and you've got to basically import these in. So the way you do that is you just double click on them and they will import, and go OK. And if I do that for the next one, oops, double click, go OK. And then basically now if I go to that sequence I created before and I want to drag and drop those in, and we will keep existing settings. We don't want to faff around with matching anything. So we'll whack that in, put that in, and then, yeah, so basically that is how you put them into a timeline that's brand new. All right. So if we're working off this template that we have here, what I want to do now is I want to bring some footage in. So the way that we do that is there's a few ways. You can go File, Import, and you can select the footage. You can go to where the footage is, and you can actually drag it in. So I got to grab that footage folder, which has all my video in it, and drag it straight into here and drop it in this area down here. That's another way to do it. So just let go and it'll import. Or a third way is you can double click in this gray area here, and that will bring up this window to import. The same as if I went File, Import, it brings up a similar window. And if I want to bring in a whole folder of files, I can just click the folder and go import. If I want to bring in one file, I can click one file, go import. If I've got multiple files, I can click and make a selection like that, click and drag up, or I can click one, hold down Shift, click another, and go import, same thing. But I'm going to bring in the whole footage folder. So I click on that, go import. All right, bring that in. And then you'll see it's come into my area down here, and I can go in I can open up this footage in here. All right. And you'll see this has been created at 25 frames per second. Now, the reason we create stuff at 25 is because we're using cameras that are especially sort of more designed for that frame rate. Frame rates nowadays don't really matter in terms of what you create your timeline as. You can create it at 25, you can create it at 30, you can create it at 60, you can create it at 100 if you wanted to. But for your timelines, probably what I would suggest is maybe sort of trying to keep it maybe at that 30 frames per second, just because that's the kind of footage you're most likely going to be bringing in. So, all right, so this is my footage. So I've got my footage here. And then what I want to do now is I want to start bringing that into my timeline to be able to edit it. And so what you'll see on my timeline here, and I'll just bring this up to get this a bit bigger, and you can click in these little gaps here at any time and drag them and move them around. As you see, you've got these tracks here. There's like these lines, and you'll see how that super or superimposed banner, as it's a UQ super, that's what it means, a superimposed banner, is on one of these tracks. And the thing about these tracks is you can actually click on it and just move stuff to different tracks. And all that's doing is, you see, if I move this over to here and then move my, what we call the playhead, which allows me to basically just move through the time of my video. At this point, you see I'm at 35 seconds. You can see that that banner that I had there is now sitting on top of what I had underneath it. So basically whatever is lowest in this sort of row of is lowest on the rows is underneath anything that's on top. It kind of makes sense. It's basically like stacking stuff on top of each other. And you can click on them and move them around however you want them to move them around. And it's good because it means that I can just grab this and I can just get that out of the way. If I don't want that in my, I want it for later, I can just keep dragging across, just get rid of it, just move it out of the way. So I want to get some footage in. So how do I get footage into my timeline? So there's a couple of different ways. One is you can just drag the footage directly onto the timeline. The other way is you can actually select a certain portion and bring that portion into your timeline. So I'll show you both ways. So if I know that this is my footage and I double click on that footage so I can have a bit of a look at it. And I know, all right, so this bit of footage here, I can play it through.
Next door. And this NV center, nitro.
Right, so I can play that through. I get a bit of a sense of what it is. So there's a little bit here where he kind of, all right, so there's about 9 seconds. You can see I'm up to 9 seconds. There's about 9 seconds of rubbish we can get rid of. And he talks for a while. And then there's at about 2 minutes and 21 seconds, there's all this here that we can kind of cut out. So what I could do is I could go, all right, so if I want this clip to start, say here at 10 seconds, I can go move it to 10, press I on the keyboard, and that creates what we call an in point. And then if I move that to, say when he's finished up, sort of here-ish, I go O on the keyboard, that creates an out point. And now basically just between those 2 points is what's going to be brought in. And if I grab that and drag that down, literally down to my timeline here, you'll start to see what's happening. It gets a bit weird here because it actually separates out the audio. So if I drop that down, you'll see that we've got video, which is in this these top tracks is video, and the bottom tracks is audio. So that means, you know, if and I'll just zoom out, you can zoom out by clicking this little button here and zoom out. What I can do is you can see now I can start moving my video up some tracks if I wanted to have that in a different spot. So I wanted that above stuff or below stuff. I can also move audio around. Audio is a bit different. It doesn't matter where in the stack the audio lives because it's just audio. So it can be anywhere, but video, it does matter. So just be sort of wary of that. All right, so it's brought in just a bit of video that I selected between there. So that's great. So I can do the same thing to the next clip. Or if I didn't want to do that to the next clip, so this is this clip here, that's quite the long one. So if I didn't want to, say, create an in and out point, if I just want to drag the whole clip in as is, I could do that as well. I could literally just click the clip here and just go over to here and literally just drag it straight on and drop it onto my timeline like that, without actually having to sort of trim any bits off the start and the finish of it. So that's another way to do it. So how do we know where to put these two clips? So I'll give you a bit of background. So we actually use two cameras for this shot. So if I go back over to here, we have one angle, which is basically the person speaking and a wider shot. And this other clip I just brought onto the timeline, oops, this one here, it was shot at exactly the same time, but we had a second camera. So if you had the luxury of two cameras, I'll show you how to sync those two cameras up. So you can essentially very easily cut between those two cameras and also be able to have them in sync, because you don't want to put a clip onto the timeline and then just not have it in sync with your other clip, because it'll obviously won't make sense. So the next thing we need to do is basically arrange these clips so they're in the right order. So we want to have, which video do we want to have on top? So, and there isn't really any right or wrong answer. There is one that I think sort of works a bit better. So, and I have to think about it, is that, all right, if I'm going to be playing this video out, and then essentially every so often, I'm going to want to cut to this other clip where he's referring to something a little bit closer, then probably what I want to do is I actually want to have this clip above that one. And then wherever he's referring to the piece of equipment and I want to cut to this other shot, I'll simply chop out a bit of this video. So this video then is seen underneath. So the best way to demonstrate that is to show you. So what I'll do is I'll actually click the video here, drag that above, click this one, drag that down like that. All right. And then basically and I'll just neaten things up a bit here so they're all kind of all in line. So what that's done is now what I can do is this video here, say for example, whenever he refers to the bit of machinery, say here, what I can do is I can chop a piece out of this top clip, which will reveal the matching footage and the bottom clip. But it's not going to match now because they're not actually in sync. So how do we actually make them in sync? So when I do make that chop, it actually does line up perfectly. So what we can do is, if you have two clips that recorded at the same time and they both had sound, so you can see these clips both have sound, what you can do is do an auto sync, whereby basically the software will go, all right, it's going to look at these waveforms, and these are basically what we call audio waveforms. And these are essentially just a graphical representation of the audio. And what it will do is it'll look at these and it'll try and match it up with the clip below it. So what you do is you select both clips and you can click and make a drag a selection like that. Right click, synchronize. All right. And then you go down to audio track channel, and then change that to mix down. All right. So to be perfectly honest, I don't actually know what doing this any other way does. This is one of those things that you don't need to learn everything that the software does to know what works. I just kind of figured mix down worked. I don't know what the other two do. So you go, okay. And what it's going to do is going to analyze it. And now it's put them in sync. So just shifted them across a little bit, you saw. So that's great. So now I know that if I have this clip and I just hide that for a second, I know that that clip now matches up with that one. So one thing you may have noticed is that our video is cropped in. Now, the reason it's cropped in is because this video was shot at 4K, which is great. And so it means that, yes, we can zoom in on our footage, and this is what I mean by zooming in on 4K footage. You can get really close to the subject without losing quality. But in this particular case, we're not wanting to do that. We're wanting to have this fit the frame. So what we do is we basically just select both clips by clicking and dragging, right click, and we literally go fit to frame. And so what fit to frame does is it scales that video down and has it fit nicely in the frame. All right, and it's the same with the other clip, and I'll reveal the other clip. Now you'll see, I did this before, I didn't explain it, but see there's a little eye? So if I click the little eye for that track, it'll hide that, that particular track and reveal the one underneath it. And you can see they are in sync because see where his hand is there? The other camera angle is here, filming this way. So if I hide that, you'll see that his hand is up in that spot. So these clips do match. So that's great. And you can also tell by just playing the clip, and you'll know that you'll hear a really loud audio because you've got two tracks of audio.
Full quantum computer as such, but it's a qubit, which are one of the essential.
And so we've actually got the nice audio and the rubbish audio. We've got nice audio from the main camera, which is this one here, and you can see it's got the audio here attached to it. This one just had the on-camera audio, so it wasn't a lapel mic. You can see how he's wearing a lapel mic to get the nice audio. In this other side shot, it was just using the onboard audio. So we want to not use that. So the way that you can do that is you click the little M on that track for that audio, and that will mute that track. So now
essential elements of a quantum
we're just
computer.
using
a qubit being
the nice audio from his track. So the next thing we need to do is we need to do a bit of trimming. So this video here is far too long because it's sort of got this sort of faff at the start we don't need. We want the video to start here, which it does.
Do you want to look inside?
So what we can do is we can start trimming this footage. So basically I can go to the start of this footage here, move my cursor, it'll turn into this little red square bracket with an arrow pointing in. And you can click and you can drag it there. So Kim's just put a thing, why would you not just unlink it and delete the bad audio? The reason being is that you can do that. So you can have your audio here and you can right click it, you can go unlink, and then you can click on the bad audio and you can delete it. The reason that you want to avoid that is because sometimes your audio will go out of sync again at some other point. And if you don't have the original audio to put it back in sync, you know, you run into problems. So yeah, and I've had that happen a lot when you're editing a video and the video goes out of sync and you're like, oh, I need to go back and fix that, but you've deleted the audio from that other clip, so you can't sync it up again. So yeah, so this video starts nicely here.
Do you want to look inside a quantum computer?
So that's great. And we'll go to the end and do the similar thing. We'll drag this in because the video. So there's actually a piece here where something kind of happens.
Data.
So we'll leave this little bit at the end here because we're actually going to cut to something happening, a real close-up of the little green laser at this particular point. So we'll keep that little piece in and we'll just drag it probably to around about, probably to there. And you'll see they'll snap to each other as well, which is nice. So that's how you trim clips from each end. You literally just move to it, click, and drag in or out. Now what we want to do is we want to identify some areas where we want to chop so we can reveal the clip from underneath. So there's a few spots here. There's this one here. We want to get closer to the footage here. So the way I do that is I literally go over to the little blade here, click the razor tool, and then put my, what we call the playhead or current time indicator. It's got a few names. We'll put it just the point where we start to lift that up. And then we'll go to that top clip, which is the one that we're currently seeing. And I just press where that line is. And then I move here. And then I do the same thing there. I click. All right. And then what I can do then is that I can actually delete or see, and this is a bit of a debate whether you delete or hide the footage. If you're doing a really complex shoot where you might want to get that footage back easily, you may just want to hide the footage instead of deleting it. So the way that you can delete stuff is literally click on it and delete. The problem is you're going to delete the video and the audio at the same time. So this might be a good opportunity maybe where you want to unlink your footage by right-clicking and going unlink. And then it means that you can click on the video and delete it, and then that reveals the video underneath. Or you can right-click on it and go enable, and that will actually disable it. So you're keeping the clip there, but you can actually get it back at another time. For a simple video like that, probably don't need to, but for a complex one, disabling stuff may help because you may want to get that footage back easier. I mean, you can get the footage back by literally just dragging this in. Now, sometimes it doesn't let you. So in order to do that, you might have to hold down Option on the keyboard and drag it, and that'll get the clip back. But yeah, so there's a few options to get it back. But so if I go through, identify other points. All right, so here is sort of points to it. I get my tool again. Click, click. All right, I can right click on it. I can go unlink. I mean, I could unlink the whole entire clip if I wanted to, so I didn't have to unlink individual things as I do it. Again, it's up to you. Refers to it again. All right. So I won't go to every point that he refers to it because we've got to crack along. But yeah, so that's sort of the basics of sort of piecing something together. It's a matter of bringing it onto your timeline. And if you have audio that you need to sync up, you sync it up. If you need to chop the ends off your footage, you just move to each end, drag and move it to chop and make it shorter. If you need to cut a clip and it's in the middle of a piece of video, then you can get your blade tool and you can click on it and cut it. And then you decide whether you want to enable it or disable it. It's up to you, depending on how complex your edit is. So at the moment, we've got this entire video here, and it's kind of stuck in limbo in the middle of our timeline. We want to get it into sort of a position where it's sitting underneath our nice banner here and our text here. So what I want to do is I want to just select that, drag that out of the way. So I've got some room for this when I select that and drag it in. So it kind of sits nicely at the start. And if I zoom in closely, you'll see where I am at with this. You'll see that if I move this and then drag it to just there, you can see that is just at that intersection of that fade in and fade out. All right. Now, this fade in and fade out is a bit different to a transition. This fade in and fade out is actually a black image that fades in and a black image that fades out, which is a bit different to a normal transition. A normal transition you would actually add by going over to, you click the little arrow here and you can go to Effects. And you can go down to Video Transitions, say Dissolve, and you go to Cross Dissolve, for example, click, drag that, and you drag that to the end of the clip you want to fade in, and you'll see what happens. That will fade in. Or you can do a dip to black. Click and drag that to here, and that will fade to black and then fade over. So that's how you add transitions to your clips. You could also add a transition to the beginning of clips as well. All right, so that's another way to do it. If you wanted to add a fade to your clip and also a fade to your video, you can always right-click and go Apply Default Transition, and that will actually apply a default fade to the front of that clip and also fade to the audio. If you want to delete those, you just click on them and press Delete. If you don't want to, say, right-click and apply a transition to both of these things, you could always just, if I wanted to, hold down Option and right-click on just the audio, or sorry, here. So if I hold down Option and right-click on just the audio and go Apply, see how it just added it to that one? Whereas if I just right-click on there and not hold an Option, it'll try to apply it to the audio and the video. So that's a way of only applying to one thing. Adding this extra, actually, I'll add this little bit to the end. So if I grab that and drag that to the end like that, and you'll see that has a little fade built in with the two little colored purples. If you didn't want to use that, if you just wanted a fade instead of using that, you could always just use a cross dissolve between those two clips, and then it would fade between those two clips like that. So you can either use those kind of fades, or you could use the ones built in. I'd suggest using these ones built in just because they do fade nicely to purple and then fade into the thing. It just makes it easier so you're not having to faff around with doing your fade in and fade outs at the beginning and the end. All right. So what's the advantage of using two clips instead of one clip with a fade at each end? So the reason that we use these here, we have these two clips that sort of fade in and fade out, is because A, this is a template, um, and B, it's just nice to be able to just plop that straight on and we know that it's there. We have our template here, we drag it to there. We don't have to worry about trying to add in a transition, because if we didn't have this fade in here and then fade out as this little black fade in, fade out here, we'd have to put a separate fade on this. We'd have to put a separate fade on this, a separate fade on this other clip. So we're putting clips on, like separate fades on separate clips, which gets a bit messy. Whereas if there's literally an image that fades in and then fades out right at the top of the stack, we don't have to worry about messing around with putting individual fades on individual clips at the start and the finish. We do in here when we're adding them, but that's fine. We just do it at the end just to make it easier and quicker for us to use our templates. And of course, if you wanted to add in another clip, you certainly could do that. You just need to go back to your project panel here. All right, and say I wanted to get this bit of footage in. I could select the part I want where it turns green. Yeah, which is cool. I could do it before, go in, go out, drag and drop that on here. All right, I could mute that track if I wanted to. All right, I could right click, fit to frame, and then basically as that's going on, it cuts to a nicer, closer shot. So what happens if you want to improve the look of our footage at all? So what if we want to, play around with the colors of it? So maybe it's a little bit too blue or a little bit too dark, or we want to boost the color. Well, what we can do is we can actually click on a clip that we want to correct, and we can go up to Window, and we can go down to something called Lumetri Color. And so Lumetri Color, what that allows us to do is from this panel here, I wouldn't worry about anything below creative. That gets a little bit intense, but you can certainly do it in your own time. If you just go to basic correction, what you can do in basic correction is if you have a clip selected and you go to basic correction, what you can do is you can fix the exposure. So maybe it's too bright or too dark. You can play around with the footage. Increase the contrast, which basically just makes the blacks and the whites a little bit more punchy, a bit more of a contrast between them. Highlights tend to brighten up the bright parts of the image if you drag that up, or darkens the lighter parts of an image. Whereas if you play around with shadows, it kind of brightens up the darker parts of an image and darkens the darker parts of an image. So they're kind of the main ones that you'll ever want to use. I wouldn't worry about whites and blacks. You can look at that in your own time because that sort of really affects the blacks and the whites. I'd sort of play around with the highlights and the shadows, exposure and contrast. If you feel a video is a little bit too warm, you could always drag the temperature over to the left to a little bit more bluish. Or if you feel like it's a little bit too cool, as in the footage is a little bit too blue, you might want to warm it up a little bit. It all depends this is really sort of how up to you how it looks. If you feel it looks a little bit too warm, a little bit orange, then you can sort of drag that down into the cooler. And a lot of this is by eye. And so that's sort of your basic ideas of correction. There are a lot more here. Maybe the only other thing you might use is in creative, is if you have something that you might want to sharpen. So if it's a little bit soft, as in a little bit out of focus, you might want to sharpen it up a bit. Or you might want to change the vibrance. So the vibrance allows you to sort of increase the color saturation of it. Saturation a little bit more intense. We don't tend to use saturation too much. We tend to like vibrance. Vibrance tend to is a nicer way of sort of brightening up your colors. So that's improving the color of your images, and obviously there's a lot to it, and it's one of those things that you need to go and investigate. And what I do recommend is doing those color corrections before you go and chop things up, because if you do that after, it means that you've got to then copy the settings from this clip. So this clip hasn't had those settings added to it. So if you wanted to copy from this clip, so if you wanted to get the color correction to this clip, you'd either got to go in and do those corrections separately because they're separated now, or what you can do is click on the clip, go to Edit, Copy, and then go to the clip that you want to apply the corrections to, and you can go to Edit, Paste Attributes, and then what you can do is you can go in and you can tick Lumetri Color, To be safe, you can kind of untick all these others, so you're not applying anything you shouldn't, and then just have Lumetri color ticked, and that means that that will then apply it to that clip, which is really handy. All right. The other thing that you might want to do is correct the audio. So the audio is done by, if you go to Window, you can go to something called Essential Sound. So if I click on Essential Sound, the nice thing about Essential Sound is that you can actually select all the audio for your clip and make the changes. So if I click and drag a selection and then go over to here, what I can do is in my Essential Sound, I can go, all right, what do I want to do here? I want to, it's detected it as dialogue, so that's good. It knows it's dialogue. The main things that you're probably going to want to fix in your video is the background noise. So this video here has
set up. We use
quite a lot of background noise in the background and also a little bit of reverb. So the main things that you'll want to fix here is probably going to repair, click reduce noise, and then probably put that around about 3 and just see how that sounds.
green laser light to read out
So that worked really, really well. So basically just got rid
the
of
state of the qubit. We excite
just got rid of any background noise in that. If you bring that up to high,
the electrons to high energy levels with the green laser.
it's a bit hard to hear over here, but the higher the level, the more it starts to get rid of the nicer detail of the voice. Whereas if you sort of have it around about 3, less than 5, you're still retaining a bit of the nice tone of the voice, but it's just basically detecting any noise and getting rid of it. You can also do the same thing with reduce reverb. It might get rid of a bit of the reverberation in the background. The other thing to be aware of is the audio
pattern,
level.
and then a vacant
So you'll
spot
see
next
here,
door. And this NV center,
on the right-hand side here, you'll see a green bar.
nitrogen vacancy center, has a set of electron levels. There's some
So that green bar, what we ideally want that is we want that to sort of sit around about the -9 to -6 area. And this is decibels, so it's measured in decibels. And we kind of like to have our audio sit at its maximum sort of around about the 6 to sort of 9 area here. And this video actually is already
there,
around that.
and it's the
mark,
states of
so
these
that's
electrons.
great. If it wasn't, what we could do is go to the clip volume and just drag this up a bit. Now, all you're doing with this dragger is just increasing the volume. So if I press play on that,
we manipulate and use as our qubit. In this particular setup,
you'll see now that I've raised that up, it's getting into the red, and that's really going past. You don't want this ever to get into the red. That's bad for your audio. You'll see if I bring this all the way down, it's quite low. So basically, just moving this in a way that the where your video audio peaks, it kind of sits between maybe about 6 or -6 and -9 there in that area there. But mine's fine, so I don't need to worry about it. Adding audio to your clips as well. So if you have any, audio as in, I mean, if you've got some music. So I've got some music in this folder here. I can drag that. This is the other method you can drag files in. I can drag and drop that in. All right, bring that up to the top. And if I want to bring that audio in, I can click on it, drag and drop it, making sure I put it in a track that doesn't have something else in it. Otherwise, I will get rid of it. So I can put my audio here. Now I have audio in my track.
Well, perhaps it's not a full quantum computer.
All right, if I want to bring down the level of that particular clip, what I can do is I can again go over to clip volume over here, bring that down.
Computer as such, but it's a qubit, which are one of the essential elements of a quantum.
And essentially when it comes to the audio level, it's just making sure that it's at a level that's not too loud, it's not overburdening the audio that's already there.
Computer. A qubit being equivalent of a classic.
So that's really up to you. It's a matter of just basically just making sure that the audio doesn't get too loud. And audio can be edited exactly the same as video can. It can be dragged in and out. If you want to add a nice fade to the beginning of a clip, you can right click on that and go apply default transition, and that will fade that in. Do the same thing, right click, that'll fade it out. So now this bit of audio will nicely fade in.
Do you want to look inside a quantum computer?
All right, so that works really well. And the same thing will be if you record a piece of voiceover as well. So if you record something on your phone, a piece of voiceover, you can bring it in and drop it into the timeline. Now, there are a few other aspects of the clips that you can change. So if you click on a video clip here and you go to effects options here, there's a lot of things in here. Again, these are the kind of things you can sort of go over in your own time. But one of the main things you might be doing is going to the motion area. And basically what the motion area allows you to do is if you have that click selected and you go to motion, it allows you to change things like the position. So if I click this first value and just click and drag, I'm just clicking and dragging with my mouse left and right, and it changes those values. That's essentially the coordinates. Now, you don't really need to know what these coordinates mean. They're basically just coordinates of where, in a pixel value, the video is sitting in the video. But really, if you just want to move a piece of video, you can click and just drag that to the left. This other number here, you can click and drag that left and right, and that'll move it up and down. And essentially just allows you to move the clip around. And you can do the same thing with scaling as well. Same thing with rotation. You can also crop in, so the percentage cropping in of each edge as well. So they're just kind of the ways that you can affect the footage. You can also go in and change the opacity of the footage as well if you wanted to. So and there's a lot of other things in here that you can sort of play around with as well. So one of the last things that you'll want to do with your video is essentially know how to export it out. Actually, one thing I should say is that what you really should do is make sure that you're saving your projects. So make sure that every so often you're going file save. Premiere does have an autosave feature where it will kind of automatically save the piece of video every so often. But just to be sure, it's always good to file save. Those autosaves, they actually live in the autosave folder here. So my last autosave was 150, as you can see here. So this is what this folder is here. It kind of populates that with autosaves. So if something happens to your project, you can go back and you haven't lost everything. So to export this video out as a standalone video file that you can put wherever you want, the way you do that is literally just go to export at the top. All right, so you've got export there. And what I kind of tend to get people to do is I tend to get them to use a YouTube preset for a start. And then what we do is we sort of dial back the quality a bit to bring the file size down. Now, again, this is one of those places in a piece of software there where there's a lot going on, a lot of numbers, a lot of sliders, looks a bit terrifying. But what I suggest is this, is where it says preset, you click drop down menu, you go to more presets. And then literally just type in YouTube, all right, and click YouTube, 1080p, go okay. All right, and then that's all you need to do there, except for one more thing, and that's going into video, clicking more, and then going down to where we have what we call the bit rate. Now, I don't want to get too sort of technical, but basically the bit rate is how much information is being used, how many megabits per second are being used to run the piece of video. It's a bit like an internet connection. The higher the megabit internet connection you have, the more bandwidth you have, and you can have high quality stuff and streaming, etc. It's the same with a piece of video. The higher the megabits, the better the quality of the video. Now, we actually put our videos at 5. It seems low, but 5 is actually quite good. It's quite an all-rounder. The quality of the video is still quite good. It's small file size, easy to upload, easy to download. So we tend to put ours at 5. All right. So then you just give it a name. So I'll just leave it as a default name. That's fine. And then just a location. So you click the little blue text here. Then you'd go and find where your folder is, the output folder. You'd go save. And then basically you would go export. And that will give you a bit of a counter that counts up. And so it basically allows you to have a look and just see how long your video is going to take to export. All right. All right. I won't wait for the whole thing to go. All right. And then basically, you just need to go in and just sort of make sure your video is there. And I know I canceled this one, so it's kind of only going to have a part of it, and it also looks terrible because it's because it's got that a bit of rubbish over there. But Um, but yeah, so it's always good to make sure that you make sure that your video has worked, and you play back through, and you make sure that it's all hunky dory. Um, all right. So I guess the other question is, yeah, are there any questions? I know there was a question in there about doing a two passes, like when you go to the export, and you choose to do a one pass or a two pass. Um, so what two pass allows you to do? It's a little bit interesting the way that two pass works. Is it sort of allows you to sort of go in and set what we call a maximum bit rate and a target bit rate. So we only tend to sort of do a one pass, but basically what you can do is you can go in and you can select, if the video needs a little bit more information. Um, It'll actually use that bandwidth. So and this is really good for really, if you have really complex stuff that's really fast moving motion, if the video needs more data to run and have a higher quality, it will actually use more data. Whereas for the most part, it will sort of sit around the 5 megabits per second to run it. And then if it needs more, it will use a little bit more bandwidth. So your file size will be a little bit bigger, but yeah, it's just another way to export your videos. So we tend to just keep ours at that. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to throw them at me, or you can send me. Um, I'll bring up my email address if I can find my PowerPoint. I've lost my PowerPoint. Oh, I've got too many windows going on. There it is. All right. So that's my email address there if you ever need to grab me. That is not my phone number. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to fire them at me now, or you can flick me an email. That's perfectly fine. So this was recorded, so a recording of this will be made available. There is a lot to get through in this, so it is very much a crash course in video editing. So there is a lot that you kind of have to skip over when you do a session like this, but it gives you sort of the bare bones of what you need to do to kind of bring a video into a timeline, edit it together, and create some kind of output. But yeah, and it's certainly something that YouTube is your friend when it comes to exploring this a little bit more. There's hundreds and will be thousands, tens of thousands of things out there to help you to learn Premiere. And the nice thing as well is that the skills you learn on here can be very easily translated into a lot of other video editing programs as well, because they work very, very similar. Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right. If there's no questions, yeah, we might leave it there. So thank you, everyone. Hope you got a lot out of it. And we've got one more minute left, so we might just leave the poll up for a little bit longer until a few people sort of leave, and then we'll finish it off. So thank you, everyone.